You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Nicodemus will be joining us in a bit to talk about 3 distinct kinds of moving on. That's right. We're talking about 3 different ways to let go: graduation, divorce, and death. Why? Because today is a special celebration for the minimalists. Today is graduation day. We're letting go of several people, things and non-things that have been difficult for us to let go of. And no, this is not an April Fool's joke. I know this is coming out on April Fool's Day, but this is very real. Plus, we're going to answer a bunch of your questions as well. So coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about detaching from his former spouse. And then we've got a lightning round question about how to move on when you feel like you can't let go of someone or something, followed by a very special right here or right now segment and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 437. That's the full 2-hour episode where we answer like 4 or 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers, TK. If you've got a question or a comment for our show, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. Our phone number is 406-219-7839 or email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Aaron.
Hey, how's it going, Minimalists? This is Aaron from Seattle, and I am a Patreon subscriber. I just want to give a special shout out to TK, Josh, and Ryan, and everyone in the studio. The work that you guys are doing is incredible, and you've helped me completely change my life. My question today is, how can I effectively navigate the challenges of detaching from my former spouse while actively co-parenting and maintaining a strong familial bond? Given our shared responsibility to our son, it is important for us to prioritize consistent and frequent quality time together. Inevitably, such interactions can blur the line between our past and present relationship, like flirting and sex. I find it difficult to fully detach from this dynamic, unable to set aside the emotional attachment that persists. But despite desiring to move forward, I inevitably find myself engaging in activities that go beyond the scope of co-parenting, such as attending to household chores and assisting her in various capacities in her life. This frequently invokes the feelings of being married once again, a sentiment that is echoed by our family as well. Thanks again, guys. Keep up the good work.
TK, I'm interested in your thoughts on this because Aaron is seemingly in this liminal space right now. I wrote down this minimal maxim: every relationship ends by way of graduation, divorce, or death. And I want to talk about what those 3 things might mean real quick. And then I'd love to hear your insights because he hasn't gone through any of those necessarily. Or maybe there was a divorce, or maybe there was a graduation, and maybe even it felt like a death. So for me, graduation is celebratory. It's the celebratory moving on from a person, place, idea, thing, or commitment after a favorable stay. Now, favorable does not mean perfect. Favorable doesn't mean it went exactly how I thought everything should have gone. But sometimes it's about reframing. And for me, especially with my first marriage, I found that reframing it from divorce to graduation was a more useful way for me to move on, but also to acknowledge the past, to celebrate the past without carrying that past forward. And then, of course, you have divorce. We all know the twinge of divorce. You even hear the word divorce, and it's bitter. And divorce is bitterly tearing yourself away from a person, place, idea, thing, or commitment after an overlong stay. I stayed here too long. This relationship has become obsolete, or at least the way that it is constituted right now. And I think this happens when you don't graduate at the appropriate time. Imagine that you're back in high school, TK, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I just got out of the 12th grade. I guess I'm just going to stick around for a while. At some point, a year from now, 5 years from now, a decade from now, you're going to be like, get me, I'm bitter, I'm resentful. In fact, I wrote down some associated qualities of divorce: annoyance, frustration, anger, resentment, contempt, renouncement. I'm going to renounce this person or this relationship. Scarcity. Divorce is often the product of a scarcity mindset. Whereas if you look at graduation, the associated qualities of graduation are a lightness, appreciation, acceptance, freedom, joy, grace, peace, wholeness, abundance. And so I like to make this distinction, and I want to be clear, it's a sort of reframing here. I don't mean you're literally going to get a diploma from your relationship. And also with divorce, sometimes that just means we stayed way too long and now we feel resentful or bitter about that. There's this third way that we move on, and it's death. And death happens either literally or figuratively. Death is being forced to terminate your relationship with a person, place, idea, thing, or commitment before you are ready to let go. Could be a literal death. Someone dies and you feel that sense of loss, especially if it was unexpected, right? But sometimes a relationship just dies. Someone ghosts you and they walk out and you feel like, oh, this is still incomplete. And so I wrote down some associated qualities for death. It's loss and shock and denial and grief and confusion and chaos, fear. And there's also this partiality, like, oh, this feels incomplete. I was not ready for this to happen. And so I think what we're talking with Aaron about today is he's in this liminal space where he didn't necessarily have a divorce. It's not a bitterness about the relationship, but he hasn't really moved on from the relationship either. And so he's dragging bits of the past into the present. And I think that's probably because he hasn't celebrated the relationship for what it was and graduated from it into a new relationship.
By the way, I see in your three categories some overlap between divorce and death, because if you are on the receiving end of a divorce that you don't want, that for you is a kind of death, though for your partner, it's a divorce. Would that be a right way to categorize it in your
I think
layout?
so. And I think there's overlap with all three of these because you can have a divorce where it's bitter, but then you can recontextualize it as a graduation. You can have a death, but get to a moment where you have acceptance, which is sort of the spirit of a graduation. So it's certainly going to start one way, but it doesn't have to end the way that it starts.
And death itself, right? Outside of the context of divorce, death can be construed as a kind of graduation. And graduation, if you sort of like strip away the concept of death from the demonization of it, can be a kind of death, but a death that is necessary, a necessary part of evolution, right? So there's some interesting stuff here. Aaron, the first thing I think about is it's better to be in the situation that you're in than to be struggling with the problem of fighting and yelling all the time. It's my personal opinion, right? Hey, every time we get together, we find ourselves laughing together, flirting together, loving each other, and just having a good time that I regret having. Well, that sounds to me like a little better than every time we get together, we're fighting in front of the kid, we're yelling in front of the kid, and so on. So I'll just contextualize it with that. However, if this is something that is creating problems in other areas of life, it's one of those things where it can simply be helpful to state intentions ahead of time. Sometimes the sheer power of looking another person in the eye and saying, hey, ahead of time, based on the patterns we've had in the past, this is where I want to go with you. This is what's off limits for me. And setting forth that intention produces a certain kind of tension when you're together and you feel tempted to go in that direction. Professor Sean and I were talking before the show, and I was asking him about the light phone and if he can rig my iPhone to emulate a light phone. And he says, yeah, you can do it. And I said, well, one question about that, can I truly take away the options to have apps, or will it just look like an iPhone so that I take this ability away from myself, even if I want to download an app? And he says, no, you can't do that. And then he says, but what you could do is just rely on old-fashioned discipline. and Danny and I laughed, and it made me think about two kinds of discipline. The first kind of discipline is just making yourself do the things that you know you need to do. But the second kind of discipline is like what someone in recovery exercises when they say, I'm not going to go into that bar. I'm not going to go around those friends. It's the discipline of knowing your weaknesses, being honest about them, and setting up boundaries that protect you from putting yourself in situations where you know you have not developed the willpower to resist it. Both those kinds of discipline are important because discipline is just a means to an end, right? It's not about holding up a badge that says, look, everyone, worship me, I'm disciplined. It's about saying, no, this is the life that I want to live, and discipline is whatever gets me there. And I think by being intentional and having a conversation about it, and then setting some boundaries for where are we going to hang out together as a family? How am I going to pick up the kid, and how are you going to pick up the kid? To what degree are we coming into each other's spaces, and for how long? And if you have a conversation with her about that, it can give both of you a chance to put that on the table and just own who you want to be rather than being on autopilot and being led by impulses.
I have a good friend back in the Midwest, and he graduated from high school. He went off to college and eventually got his master's degree and became a counselor for high schools. And he went back to his high school and became a counselor there. Now, why do I bring that up as an analogy? Well, because he graduated, but he eventually came back, but his role was appreciably different within that system, within the school. And the same is true with many of my former lovers. I have a great rapport with those people without needing for the relationship to be exactly the same as it was before. In fact, the way that it was before didn't work for whatever reason. And every relationship is unique, but here's the 12 different reasons that these 12 relationships didn't work, right? And that's okay. But you can also come back to that relationship after an appropriate amount of time. You get to decide what's appropriate for you. And I love this idea, TK, of, okay, you moved on, but it sounds like you haven't completely moved on to what the new version of the relationship is. And maybe you're telling yourself like, oh, we're not allowed to be intimate. Okay, that's fine if that's what you want, right? But also if you want something where, yeah, well, we're still intimate, but just intimate in a different way. Intimate, by the way, doesn't mean sexually intimate necessarily, but there are different ways that people interact with each other intimately. Or if you just want to be cordial with the other person because you're co-parenting, that's fine too. But if you don't know what the puzzle looks like, and I just hand you 1,000 puzzle pieces, good luck trying to put that together. And that's where Aaron is right now. Turn over the box, Aaron. What does the front of the box look like? What is that puzzle that you're trying to put together? Because right now you've got a bunch of pieces there on the table and you're just grabbing this one, and this one might be from a completely different puzzle, right? This one's from a puzzle that existed in the past. And so I can set aside those pieces and I can determine, okay, with the pieces that I have right now, what is the puzzle that I am trying to construct here in front of me? Aaron, I'd love to give you access to our new course. It's called Simplify Everything, and it's open for 72 hours only. You can find it at simplifyeverything.xyz. And the reason I bring this up for you, Aaron, is it's 5 different weeks. We talk about physical clutter and calendar clutter and financial clutter, but we also talk about relationship clutter. And that's one type of clutter that you're dealing with right now because there's excess in this relationship. And so what we do is we provide some insights that have worked for us over the last dozen or so years as the Minimalists. And we try to declutter every aspect of your life. You can find all the details over at simplifyeverything.xyz. That course is open for 72 hours only. However, if you listen to this episode well after it was available, just get on our email list over there and we'll let you know next time it opens. We usually open it 2 times a year. All right, let's take a quick pandiculation break so we can get Nicodemus on the phone. Before we get back to our callers, Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round where we answer your questions from Patreon.
Yes, indeed. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We might not be on social media anymore, but you might be. And you might want to copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you like, or maybe just text our minimal maxims to your friends. Maybe you bother your parents with our minimal maxims. And by the way, we'll send all of our minimal maxims to you every week. If you sign up for our email list, you'll get our show notes. We'll never send you spam or junk or advertisements, but we will send you our show notes, which includes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minimal maxims each week. They show up right there in your inbox, theminimalists.email, if you'd like to get those show notes directly in your email inbox. Today's question is from Molly.
How can someone move on if they feel like they can't let go of a thing, career, or relationship that used to add value to their life, but circumstances have changed and they feel stuck in the past?
Well, joining us from his home office in beautiful Missoula, Montana, is my emergency contact, Ryan Nicodemus.
Oh, man, I still put you down as my emergency contact. That's hilarious, man.
Ryan, do you have something pithy for Molly?
Absolutely. Here's my pithy answer. Our identities are shaped by that which we cling to. And, we cling to a lot of things in life, and that's okay. We're allowed to cling to things in life. The question is, how and why are we clinging to them? So if there was something meaningful that happened in your life, an experience, and maybe there's a memento or something you hold on to remind you of that experience, well, that's great. The good news is you get to decide on how you remember that experience and how you treat that experience. And I can tell you, for me, the things that I've had to let go of, that I've had to say goodbye to, instead of mourning them, which I did mourn them, but now, I celebrate them in a way because they created who I am today. I really like who I am. And, on top of it, just cherishing the moment and really honoring that experience. That for me has really been a great way to not let go, really to hang on to it in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, it's a type of letting go. It's letting go of the story we used to tell ourselves, right? We were talking to a previous caller a moment ago, Ryan. We were sort of delineating the difference between graduation and divorce. And graduation is this celebration of something that happened in the past without necessarily having to carry it forward. Whereas divorce is sort of like feeling bitter or resentful about a thing and continuing to carry that bitterness and that resentment forward. Nicodemus, we've got some exciting things during our Right Here, Right Now segment. Please stick around for that. But first, I want to get something pithy from TK Coleman. What do you got for us, TK?
It's easier to move on if you let go of the need to move on. One of the coping mechanisms I learned early on as a kid was to dismiss things as stupid when I couldn't have them. Oh, I can't go to that movie? It's stupid anyway. I can't borrow your comic book? Well, that's stupid anyway. Reminds me of a time in college when me and my friends saw this gorgeous girl and we both were like, man, she is fine. And so he stepped to her and she gave him a very icy cold shoulder. She dismissed him so hard. And he comes back to me and he's like, man, she wasn't really pretty anyway. And I was like, oh, you know what? She was all that, just like we thought about 30 seconds ago. And we don't need to tell that lie just to say she ain't the only fish in the sea. Sometimes it's that willingness to take a look at what's in our past, to take a look at that thing that served us at some point, and to be really honest about it, flatteringly honest about it. What an amazing job I had. What an amazing relationship that was. What an amazing school that was. What an amazing time in my life, without pressuring ourselves to use dismissal as a prerequisite for moving on. When we do that, we create the wiggle room to say, that was an amazing job, and it's not the last one. That was an amazing girlfriend, boyfriend, or friend to me. And that's just evidence that there are other people like that I can attract into my life. What an amazing, magical time in my life. That was the result of me being lined up with the energy of who I am and trusting in the goodness of life itself. And I wonder what else I can create from here. It's that faith in your future, what you can create, that gives you the ability to let go of the past. And you get that ability by looking at your past honestly and affirming where it has served you.
And even in that scenario you're talking about, right? With, oh, you know what? She didn't like me or whatever, but that was an amazing lesson that I got out of that, right? As opposed to renouncing the person or renouncing a thing. When we let go of social media a few weeks ago, it wasn't about renouncing social media. I'm always open to the possibility of going back and using it differently in an intentional and deliberate way. But sometimes you remove yourself, you let go for a period of time so that if it makes sense to pick it back up and use it differently, you can do that. I got something pithy here. You can't let go, then you can't move on. And so if you can't let go, it's impossible to move on. There's this old Zen parable about let go or get dragged. You'll be dragged if you're unable to let go. But as Ryan just talked about, sometimes it makes sense to cling to something. If you are on the monkey bars and you're trying to hold on, you're holding on for dear life, well, that makes a whole lot of sense because you don't want to fall, right? Seth Godin has this exercise, but sometimes we want to hold on for dear life, but sometimes we want to let go for dear life as well. And letting go begins when you loosen your grip. And that's what we're talking about today. We're reframing this holding on to something that no longer serves us. And part of that is really acknowledging if something is no longer serving you or you're no longer able to serve something, it doesn't mean we need to demonize it. We don't need to renounce it. We can recognize it for what it was. We can celebrate it by graduating on to the next thing. And we're just getting started on this episode. We've got a lot more callers to answer. But first, real quick, for right here, right now, here are a few things. A very special right here, right now segment. A few things going on in the life of the minimalist. Something exciting, some exciting news. The minimalists are experiencing several graduations at once. 2 weeks ago, during the Cal Newport episode, we graduated from social media. Although, full transparency, I still check my DMs about once a week whenever I go on to Instagram. I just treat it like email at this point. I'm not checking posts. I'm not checking anything else. But when you let go of something, you get to let go by your own terms, right? And for me, it was like, well, I still communicate with some people via direct message on Instagram. So it's a great way for me to do it, not have it on my phone. I don't check out posts, but I still go on there once a week and I'll see, oh, did anyone that I want to hear from message me? And I've been training people to, hey, if you want to get a hold of me, then please make sure you just send me a text message or give me a phone call.
Hey, now, by the way, that might be a little too sexy for the podcast, man. Like, hey, baby, even if I'm not trending, I'm still sliding into my DMs. You know, I mean, that might be a little too sexy, man.
Ladies, the DMs are still open.
Oh my God.
Leave the DM.
It's just really Nicodemus in my DMs. Let's be honest about this.
He needs to be able to see
I know
the
when
memes.
you said I checked to see if anyone messaged me that I want to respond to. I was like, oh, Milburn's been responded to me. I mean, it takes like 4 or 5 days, but it happens.
Nicodemus is always just sliding in my DMs. He's got the best memes, though.
Right.
All right, so 2 weeks ago, we graduated from social media, and we can always come back. I was using this analogy earlier, Ryan, about I have a friend in the Midwest who graduated high school, but then he went and he became a high school counselor, and now he's a counselor at the school at which he graduated from. And so it's a completely different role. And so I like reframing it that way. But because today we're graduating from something that I didn't know we would graduate from. But you and I, Ryan, we've been fantasizing about this for the last 2 or 3 years at this point. Today, the minimalists are graduating from video podcasting. Also,
Yeah, man.
2 of our beloved friends, Professor Sean and Danny Unknown, are graduating from the Minimalists today. We're going to talk about the details about all of that in a moment. But first, Ryan, I thought we would review some recent examples of our own graduations. And I think it really, for us, started back in 2010. And obviously, we had graduations before this, but Nicodemus and I both graduated from excess material possessions when we stumbled across this thing called minimalism, and Ryan did his packing party. That was a celebratory moment of sorts, and it was frustrating. It wasn't perfect, but it was a graduation from the lifestyle that we used to live. And then Ryan, we graduated from the corporate world back in 2011 at different times, but that was a graduation of sorts. And then we continued to graduate. We graduated from Dayton, Ohio in 2012. We moved out to Missoula, Montana, which we both graduated from in 2017. We came out to Los Angeles. But of course, last year, Nicodemus, you graduated from Los Angeles. Moving to Montana, I don't say back to Montana because it's a totally different experience now. And folks can listen to episode 400. We talked about that in depth. I think it was a 3 or 4 hour episode over on the private podcast. But we dove deep into the reasons behind letting go of this version of the Minimalists. I'm thinking about my own life. Last year, my wife and I graduated from her podcast. We had this great show called How to Love, which we recorded for 3 years or so. And I really enjoyed doing that. But we both got to this spot, and we talked about it in the very last episode of How to Love, where it felt like it was just time. Like, oh, this project is coming to an end, and we can either continue to drag it forward or we can let it go. And then we've had employees graduate from the Minimalists over the years, Social Jess and Podcast Sean and Jordan No More and now Professor Sean and Danny Unknown. We're going to interview both of them today on the private podcast, on the Maximal episode. And they're going to talk about all of our dirty secrets, Ryan, where all the bodies are buried.
We can get it all out in the open. I've been carrying it around for so long. So many bodies.
So Ryan, I thought it was fascinating. You and I were talking on the phone the other day about the social media graduation. And I wanted to talk to you about the sort of sneaky influence of, and maybe even the unintended consequences of social media and also of video podcasting. I'm not renouncing these things. I'm not upset that in fact, I'm very glad that we have done these things over the years, but it also feels like it is time to move on from both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We moved out to LA when you're kind of reading all that stuff out. I thought we moved out to LA to start the video, really. And we hired Jordan, and the video was amazing, but it was a lot of work. And I remember us, fantasizing about getting rid of the video because of the additional, just the additional responsibility and everything that comes with that. And it was funny because when we'd have these conversations, I just remember always saying and coming to the conclusion, us always saying and coming to the conclusion of, you know what? We're reaching way more people, and we are. We are, really adding value, adding a lot of meaning to a lot more people's lives with the video. And we kept doing that. And I think at a certain point, man, with all that extra responsibility and having to build a bigger team, it's like, yes, we are willing to do as much as we can for free for everyone who reads us or listens to us or watches us or whatever. But at what cost, And it makes me think about recently how I talk about the men's work a lot, and I had to walk away from it. And that's because I am really up against the wall with what I want to do with my time. And I found a way that I could stay with the men's team. And when I really started thinking about it, I'm like, you know what? I'm not willing to do it. I'm just not willing to put that effort in for what I'm going to get out of it. It's not something that I'm willing to do. And I have given so much to that organization. I didn't feel like I was walking away and leaving anybody hanging. So the question when it is to walk away, it's knowing when to walk away. And that's what I really appreciate about where everything's at right now, Milburn. It's not about how do you not give up or, don't give up and look for reasons to not give up. It's like, sometimes you do got to give up, and it's okay. You just got to know when to give up.
Yeah. And I even reframe that as like, know when to let go so I don't get dragged. Yes. There's a period of time where it makes sense for us to hold on to these things. However, I will say there's been this little devil on my shoulder recently who popped up, and there's all these really fascinating, I call it the traps of identity, right? And sometimes our identity gets tied up in these things we don't even realize. Like for you were just talking about the men's group or the men's team that you were on, and we don't realize our identity becomes part of that. And for me, even something as simple as like, oh, what are you going down to LA for this week? Oh, I've got to film some stuff on Tuesday. Well, now I can't say that anymore. We're not filming the podcast. But the truth is, the Minimalist podcast has always been been primarily an audio experience. In fact, 80 to 90% of our audience still listens to the audio version of the show. This is just us matching our actions with our values in many ways. Although that devil on my shoulder, just recently I ran into someone at a coffee shop up in Ojai, and he walks up to me. First thing he says, "I watch your podcast all the time." And what do I say, TK? I'm like, "Oh, wait, we're getting ready to the video version next week." I didn't want to say that to him, but no one ever says that to me. People come up to me all the time and say, "I listen to your podcast, saw you on Netflix, watched your movie, whatever." But just recently, within the last couple weeks, all of these little creepy bits of identity have crept into the picture. And who am I if I don't have the video version of the podcast? Who am I if I don't have social media? Who am I if blank? And these are all just the thin skin of identity. And we adorn ourselves with them. But all I have to do is look back and say, Ryan, 6 years ago, we had a great podcast that reached just as many people as this one does now without a video version, without sharing all of these clips on social media. And so in a way, I wanted to walk away from social media when we were literally at our peak. Last year, we had 200 million views. We reached 500 million people, 4 million followers on social media. It's not like this is some failed experiment where we're like, oh, the girl doesn't like me anymore, I might as well renounce it. No, it was like, oh, can I actually practice what I preach? Can I say I'm willing to try to let go of anything, even the so-called things at which we are successful? TK, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I don't think there are many people out there who are saying to themselves, I really want to be on social media and I just don't know how. But I do believe there are a lot of people who are saying to themselves, I would really love to take a break from social media and I just don't know how. And I think that speaks to a very common plight of our times. There's a difference between a story we can tell about the value that something has. If you buy this car, it can help you get to that place faster. If you buy this watch, it'll last forever. And stories that are fear-mongering, on the other hand, stories about how much of a loser you will be if you don't have this. So in addition to, if you buy this car, you'll get there faster. And if you don't have that car, you won't get there at all. In fact, you're going to miss out on your destiny entirely. If you don't have this watch, you won't fit in with all the important people who have that watch, and you might not get the promotion. And we make so many decisions from a place of buying into stories that are propagated through fear-mongering tactics that are very profitable for people who want to sell us these things. And it can be important to step back and say, well, wait a minute, what's the life that reflects me and the rhythm that I want to have and the energy that I want to flow? Is this something that's still a hell yes for me? Or is it something I'm just afraid to say no to because I think I'll disappear without it, right? And I think for us, with social media, it's a matter of really falling in love with the simplicity of taking a break from the social media and taking a break from the video. It feels like what's the movie title? Waiting to Exhale? It feels like an exhale, like, oh, there's so much time and energy that goes into that. And that's perfectly all right for someone else. That's perfectly all right for someone who enjoys spending that time and energy. But to let it go and say, well, let's go back to our roots when this was just an audio. And let's simplify and let's see how that feels. And sometimes you got to give your audience permission and freedom to evolve with you. And that might mean they can go with you to the new places you want to go. Or they may say, hey, man, I respect your right to go in that direction, but you are no longer for me. And that is okay, too. Both sides can make room for that without renouncing each other. But it's so important to be able to hold space for that as well.
TK, what I love about that is, when you said, I'm going to go here, and if people want to follow, like they will come with me. And what really stands out for me is all that matters is that you are where you want to be. And 100%, I think that if you are genuinely in a spot where you want to be and you're creating some amazing works, like people will follow and new people will follow. So yeah, man, I love that, man.
Ryan, I haven't been this at peace in a long time. And you know me, I avoid chasing excitement, but excitement can be a nice byproduct of what you're moving on to, or a byproduct of moving on itself. And I love what you just said there, Ryan, because this is exactly where we are supposed to be. Not supposed to be because someone else says you should do this, but this is what feels right now. Because yes, when Danny called me a month or so ago and he was like, hey, I think I'm ready to graduate from the Minimalists. In fact, from early on, I've told him like, hey, there will be a time where it will be time for you to move on. It might be a year from now. It could be 5 years from now. And now he's 3 years in and it's like, okay, it's time for me to graduate. I got a similar call from Professor Sean, and it doesn't mean that they're renouncing the work that they've done. They're ready to move on to something else. And what could I do? I could say, whoa, let me talk you into this. Can I pay you better? Can I change your skill? Whatever it is, right? But no, that is robbing someone of the dignity of letting go and forcing them. I remember when I first left the corporate world, Ryan, you'll remember this. I turned in my notice, several months notice, but my boss said, no, I'm not going to let you quit. And it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life because at first, just the thought in my head for probably less than a second, but the thought in my head was, oh, I didn't know he could stop me. Uh-oh, I guess I'm stuck here. Was the embodiment. That's what I felt. And the pure dread and despair just in that moment of, oh, I'm not allowed to let go of this. And so I've always been the opposite. Anyone we work with is encouraging them to let go even of us, because why? A, we're going to get better work from them anyway while we're working together because they feel that freedom. But also, I don't want to imprison anyone. I want to give them the freedom so that when they move on, they can move on. And so this isn't about just Danny moving on. It was a really great coincidence where it was like, hey, Danny does all the video stuff that we do. We live in Los Angeles. We can go you could throw a rock and find a dozen people who can film the podcast, right? They may not have the same skill or talent that Danny does.
They definitely don't have the heart that Danny does.
You hear that, Danny? Danny, we could replace you just by throwing a rock.
Danny, irreplaceable.
TK just threw a rock at him in the studio. So
No. What I love about Danny is the same thing I love about Matt Diavella. It's just like we get some amazing people who really connect with what we're doing, and they're very talented in what they do. Specifically video with Danny. And, I knew from like the second podcast he put out, I'm like, oh, this kid is not going to be with us for more than 2 or 3 years. I knew it.
Yeah.
Like it's a natural progression. And, whether the timing was when he was planning on it or not, it's like, Danny is really talented. So that's my way of making up for saying we could replace it by throwing a rock, Danny.
And then, of course, with Professor Sean, he's been running our social media since Social Jess left. And the ironic part about this is we removed like 70% of what we were doing on social media. And then we had our best year. We simplified. And yet we continued to reach more people. But you said something really profound, TK, on the Cal Newport episode from 2 weeks ago. You were talking about how instead of trying to reach more people, how do we go deeper with what we're creating here on the podcast?
Yeah, there are essentially two models of growth. You can think about growth horizontally, or you can think about it vertically. Horizontal growth is when you cast as wide of a net as possible. Last year, we reached 10,000 people. Next year, we're going to reach 30,000, right? And then you achieve that. It's like, well, now we're going for 100,000 and then 1 million. Then we're going to take over the whole planet. Okay, so just at what point will you be able to say, hey, y'all, we did it. We did it. Let's high five. We did it. Vertical growth is when you drill deeply and you say, hey, I've got a group of 8 kids that I'm working with. And I don't need this to be 80 kids. And I don't feel like we're adding, 10 new kids every month in order to think that this is growing. I know that it's growing because I'm pouring my soul into my work. I'm serving them with as much heart as possible. And I'm watching the progress that they are making along their path. And I think vertical growth, the art of drilling deeply, the art of staying where you are planted and watering what you have planted, cultivating the garden that you have invested in. That's a very lost art. And the algorithm chasing world of influencer culture does not incentivize us to prioritize vertical growth. In fact, it lures us into a trap of dismissing vertical growth as a form of failure, as a form of stagnancy. And then you get these ideas of, if you're not growing, you're failing. And what they mean is if you're not growing horizontally, you're at risk of not mattering. But I like vertical growth because that question has always been, how might my life be more with less? And what did Cal Newport say when he was on this show? He says, do fewer things with more heart, with more passion, with more focus, with more intensity. And so what I'm interested in is not this one thing we've been waiting to do forever that we're now going to go do. I'm interested in the unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know we're going to be working on because we are so new to this freed up energy. And now we'll have the opportunity to explore some new possibility and see what comes out of that.
Yeah.
Ryan, that's always been the spirit of what we've done is we've embraced those unknown unknowns. It's like, hey, we'll put a book out, I guess, see what happens. I don't really know. Let's try this tour thing. We didn't even call it touring at first. It was just, let's do these meetups. And we did 33 of them across the country. And the message started getting out there to more and more people. We didn't really use social media much back then. We certainly didn't have a video version of the podcast because we didn't even have a podcast. And we didn't have Netflix films or whatever. There were so many unknown unknowns. And this is sort of opening that up in a different way. Ryan, you and I never tried to become famous with this whole thing, but I found that as soon as we did, we became pseudo-famous on Netflix, and then
we did.
I found that I was looking for different ways to hold on to it, and this thing I never even asked for. It's kind of like you see it all the time with old people who try to continue to look young. But to me, the better analogy is like building a fence around a mansion that you inherited that you didn't even want. Like someone gave you this mansion, and now you're like building. I've got to protect this mansion that I don't really want, and I don't want to do that. And to me, that's the sneaky influence and some of the consequences of social media and by proxy, I guess the video piece of it as well. There could be small things like the vanity metrics and as what TK was talking about, reaching the broadest possible audience. We're successful if we reach 200 million views in a year. It's like, okay, but what did that actually do for you, right? It gave me this feel good feeling in my body for a moment. Oh yeah, I can say I did that or whatever. But is it just a vanity metric? And then also like even the stress around the demands of daily posting on social media, right? It becomes like, oh, this thing we got to do. Now we've forced ourselves into a spot where it's something we have to do. We've created this obligatory thing. No one told us we had to do it. We're telling ourselves that we have to do it. And I've also noticed the sort of tug of social media that changes the way that we create on the podcast. I've certainly found myself saying, okay, how can I make this rant that I'm about to go on less than 60 seconds so that Danny can TikTok it, right? Whereas and sometimes that makes a whole lot of sense to have a pithy rant, but other times like, no, that could be much more expansive, much more deep of a conversation if we're willing to let go of the algorithm, so to speak, which also means letting go of some of the titling and the way things are done. I've always hated clickbait titles. And while I don't think we've ever participated directly in clickbait titles, I could see the progression going that way as, oh, this one will perform better than that one. But Ryan, you remember when we started the podcast, it was always 1 or 2 word titles for the episode because we didn't need more people to click on it. We wanted to simplify. And that's what I think ultimately is what we're doing today.
It's funny how you start doing something and the doing evolves. And the reason why you're doing it is still there, very valid. But it just evolves to a point where, yeah, it's funny how you just kind of listed all that stuff off. I'm like, damn, it really was at that point, huh? But the beautiful thing, Milburn, TK, Mahalik, Danny, Mallory, everybody else, like we can all come back to this. This is not forever necessarily. It's not us, like Josh said, like eschewing these things and denouncing them and saying social media is now bad and video is now bad. Milburn, I really want to talk about our conversation the other day and the two things that came up for you that you were going to focus on. Can I talk about that right now?
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love to.
Yeah. So Milburn and I are talking, and he says to me, I'm going to be up in Ohio a lot more, stepping away from a lot. I'm going to have a lot more time, and I'm really going to focus on the things that I consume the most. And I'm like, at first I'm like, oh, we're going to start another coffee shop. But I loved his answer. He said, books and podcasts, audio podcasts specifically. And there's just something really beautiful about that, Melbourne, in the sense that you have, well, you can do anything, man. I mean, you've proven that to me time and time again. But for you to do strictly the things that you love to consume the most, there's just something really beautiful about that, man. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing all the stuff that you produce, man. Shit, I'm looking forward to seeing the stuff I produce.
I am too, which by the way, you can check out at ryannicodemus.com. You can sign up for his monthly mentoring newsletter there. Now, there are two
Let me
other...
just be honest. They're about every 6 weeks. Let me just be honest right now.
Now he's going to get it to monthly.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I left the men's work because my writing process is taking too long. I mean, I'm at a point now where it's like the deadline doesn't really matter to me in the sense that I know I'm going to get it done. And when I do, it's going to be good. And when it hits somebody's inbox on their end, if I'm in their seat, I'm like, ooh, Ryan sent me something awesome. So like, that's kind of the context I hold. But yeah, I left the men's work because I needed to shorten that process and focus on it more. And it's going great. But yeah, thanks for plugging me. RyanNicodemus.com.
I want to talk about two more things that we've graduated from, and I saved them both for the end. TK, you recently graduated from a 10-year experience with FEE, and I was hoping maybe you could open up a bit about that on this episode.
Yeah, man. FEE stands for the Foundation for Economic Education, and I've been the education director there for at least the past handful of years. And the project that I founded is called the Revolution of One. And the inspiration for the project was helping people to think about societal change as something that begins with everyday, ordinary individuals, and to expand our horizons beyond thinking about how things get done solely in terms of powerful, famous, really wealthy authority figures. Do we want to do all that we can to get those people on the side of what is good? Yes, by all means, but agency begins with looking within and saying, how can I improve my life? And how can I create value for the people that are around me? And one of the big core values of my message was going into schools, particularly places that didn't identify with the so-called liberty bubble that FEE is a part of and that identifies with, and going into schools and not starting the conversation or even caring about the political dimension of who you are voting for and which politicians you like, but focusing on the individuals in front of me and saying, hey, how can we be the leaders that the world needs? Because leadership doesn't begin with the position, it begins with the disposition. And the right disposition of leadership is something that we can all cultivate. And teachers, students, everyone really opened their hearts to these ideas. And we had a lot of growth and we did really fantastic. But there were some questions about whether or not Revolution of One was a right fit for the organizational vision and direction that FEE wanted to go in. And so the support for the project was pulled. And hey, man, that's not slander. Like I'm trying to say it in like the most neutral, objective way I can. That's just like the factual reality. FEE decided that, hey, this project and what you guys are doing, you're getting the numbers and people are praising it and you're getting great feedback. But this just isn't something that we want to invest in. It's not where we want to go. And so that happened pretty fast. And we didn't really see it coming. And so at the end of February, the Rev 1 team was gone. And my role came to an end as well. The option was put on the table like, hey, you can still work as an independent contractor and, do some work in schools and so on. But my role was definitely coming to an end. And I thought about it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to accept this as a blessing in disguise. I'm going to move on and I'm going to continue pursuing my life mission, of which my work was a mere partial manifestation outside of that familiar context. And so man, it was jarring and it was unanticipated, but at the same time, it's liberating because something that happened in the first week is I had a bunch of phone calls with other people that had done work in the nonprofit space who really valued what I was doing and wanted to talk about ways that we could work together and continue that work that I was doing at Fee. And I was getting ready to just sort of dive right back in, doing the same types of things with the same types of people and so on. And I said, wait a minute, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? You're pursuing continuity. You're pursuing stability. But this is an opportunity. Step back for a second and hit the pause button. Don't just dive into something right away. You've received a valuable gift, a chance to contemplate, a chance to reconsider, recontextualize, question your assumptions about how you want to work, with whom do you want to work, how do you want to go about serving the people that you want to serve in perhaps new and ever more creative ways. And so I'm in this liminal space now, as one of my mentors describes it, where I'm not rushing into the next thing. I'm not diving into anything. I'm taking my time and I'm prioritizing approaching the next step in a way that accords with my values, my sense of purpose, my highest excitement, and so on.
And what I love about that is you turn to death, because I remember talking to you early on and this thing felt like a death.
Yeah.
You turned that death into a graduation.
Yeah.
And you didn't allow that sense of loss and that sense of grief, the shock, the denial that you were in, the chaos that was foisted onto you, the fear, the incompleteness that you felt from that. Like, this isn't finished.
Yeah.
And so what'd you try to do? You tried to go out and I need this continuity here to finish it, as opposed to, it's time for me to graduate. This is the opportunity to graduate. And we've got one more graduation. If you've got to watch the video version of this, this is the last video episode of the podcast. Go ahead and head on over to YouTube or Patreon. Check out the video version because, most important, we buried the lead for this episode. Ryan Nicodemus graduated from his long hair.
That's right. Finally, I said goodbye to that long hair. Oh, man.
You look so much younger. I mean, I'm ready to cast you in a movie that I'm not filming yet.
I love it. Oh, man. No, I cut it off. It was weird. I just got a little intuition like a month, 2, 3 ago. I'm kept looking at my hair and I'm like chewing on it when I'm eating and conditioning it and drying it and like all this long hair problems. And I'm like, it's going to go soon. Like, I know it's going to go soon. And my mom was out in November and she said to me, son, you're a handsome man. I said, thanks, Mom. Coming from your mom doesn't mean much. I mean, I'm just kidding, Mom.
I'm handsome too.
I will jump through this computer.
That's what I was asking about earlier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least I have a mom. Anyway, so
man. Okay, hold on. Ryan. Earlier today, I swear to you, before we started this show, I said, Josh, have you ever seen Ryan get really, really, really ticked off? Like, I'm going to punch this, like that kind of, and Josh was like, no, never seen it. I was like, I can't even imagine it. And then you literally do that this episode.
Because CK, when I do, I make it very intentional. No,
is
man,
Wayne
so
Brady gonna have to slap it? Sorry.
My mom says to me, son, you are a handsome man. I'm so proud of you. You looked way better with corporate Ryan, the corporate Ryan look. And I'm like, okay, thanks. She's like, but seriously, like way more handsome with the corporate Ryan look. And so she kind of triggered that thought in me, of course. And then all the comments on every Instagram post of my hair where people are like, whatever, they give me a hard time about my long hair. But with my mom, I was like, maybe I can do this for her or something, like just because I want to cut it anyway. I was kind of looking for a reason to cut it. And then I went to New York in February and my Oma said the same exact thing to me. And I'm like, it's coming off. So I came back to Montana at, it was like a day or two after Valentine's Day. And yeah, I cut it all off, man. I was afraid the man who cuts my hair, I was afraid I was going to walk in there and be like, hey man, I need to cut it all off. And I was afraid, Milburn, that he was going to tell me what our boss told you when you tried to fire yourself, man. Like, no, you can't cut your hair off. Or like, I won't cut it off, dude. But no, he was super pumped. And yeah, I love it, man. And like all the little long hair problems I mentioned earlier, those are the ones that stood out. But like, there are just so many others that like, I'm like, why did I not do this so much sooner?
Identity, right?
I love it.
It's that trap of identity. That hey, this is who I am. I am my clothes, or I am my car, or I am my hairstyle.
Yes.
What's interesting, man, is when I first started looking in the mirror with the short hair, I didn't recognize that man. And I felt myself adapting. And I resisted, dude. I tried to look at a stranger as much as I could. And now I just, now I'm looking at my, screen now, and I know exactly who that man is. But for a week or two, it was nice, like seeing a stranger in the mirror, because the identity piece of it was big for me. And, I told you this, Milburn, I think I said it on one of the private fams, but like the biggest hurdle for me to get over cutting my hair was like 2 days before that. Someone had commented on my hair on a post and was like, cut your hair, hippie, something like that. And I'm like, if I cut my hair, they're going to think it was because of them. And I don't want them thinking it was because of them. So then my brain starts going, okay, how long should I wait until they don't think it was them? And as soon as I started to go down that road, I'm like, dude, just cut your hair. And, but there was this identity thing of like, I am me. Don't think I did something because you talked me into it. And then, not to mention like walking out of that salon was like, it felt weird. Like I felt looking in the windows as I'm like walking down the sidewalk, and man, it was I felt embarrassed. It was really weird.
By the way, that person who wrote that comment won't even notice. They'll move on to the next thing. Get rid of those stupid looking shoes, hippie.
Grow your hair back out now.
Right.
What was the second hardest thing to get over? All the profile pics that I haven't updated yet that I have to update. I'm like, God, that's like 4 pictures.
You look great, Nicodemus. Thank you for joining us today. Since we're no longer on social media, you can make sure you sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.email so we can stay connected with you. I'm really excited for this next chapter. I feel at peace. I think the audio podcast, I know, I am certain that this new version of the podcast will radically improve the experience for our listeners, for our audience, and including expanded roles for TK and Malabama. And of course, post-production, Peter. We haven't mentioned him yet, but he's always lingering in the ether. The reason our podcast sounds so outstanding and we can move into this audio adventure with our audience together. We have the best sounding podcast. It's not because of me and TK's booming voice and Ryan calling in. It has to do with post-production. Peter, thank you so much for all that you do. We'll be back on the private podcast with Professor Sean and Danny Unknown. Nicodemus, I love you.
I love you too, man.
Jinx.
From Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hey guys, my name is Elizabeth Ellis. I'm in Houston, Texas. And I just wanted to say that your episode 426, Breaking Free from Broke, really spoke to me. I have struggled with tipping ever since I came back to the U.S. at the end of 2021 after living abroad in Hong Kong for 5 years. And I had a huge reverse culture shock. In Hong Kong, tips are built right into whatever you're buying. So they account for that when they price out items at a restaurant or a cafe. And so you basically never need to tip. And I just got into the habit of just paying what's on the bill and not worrying about it. Now, for specialty services like a massage or something like that, or a pedicure, I would often add a little extra tip in because I know that that was not the case for those kind of luxury services. But I thought your take and George Campbell's take on how to tip appropriately has really helped me. I came back to an economy where suddenly the norm had jumped from 15% for a baseline tip to 18 and 20%. And I just was not prepared for that. I understand people need to make a living and everything. But boy, howdy, have things changed since I was living abroad. So I just feel like I have a lot more confidence now about when to tip higher and when not to tip higher. And I really have to thank you guys for that. So keep doing all the great work you're doing. And I will keep listening. And I really appreciate everything you do.
Elizabeth, thank you for that thoughtful comment. I enjoyed that episode with George Campbell as well. In fact, we'll put a link to that in the show notes for anyone else who has a listener tip or an insight about this episode or any other episode. Leave a comment on Patreon or YouTube, or better yet, send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com so we can feature your voice on the show. By the way, we're going to keep posting the audio version of this podcast on YouTube as well, so folks can still listen to the podcast on YouTube if they'd like. You can listen wherever you like, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. It's still available to you. All right, that's the first 25% of episode 437. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour Maximal Edition, which features interviews with a couple of minimalist graduates. We've got Danny Unknown and Professor Sean. They'll be joining us and spilling the beans, so to speak. We'll also answer a bunch more of your questions, like what's the right amount of financial support to give to my adult son or daughter? And I was forced into minimalism after my home burned down. What should I do now? Plus, we got a million other questions and simple living segments over on the Minimalists private podcast. We also have an outstanding home tour from one of our listeners this week on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. That's our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.